is that thing?
Unknown biological entity, Commander.
Lock it down, now!
Containment initiated.
You know that feeling. The one right before yawn cracks your face open like a cheap suitcase. That little vacuum in your skull, the stretch in your jaw, the way your eyes water just a bit. To a human, it's nothing. Less than nothing. It's the brain's radiator letting off steam. It's boredom. It's tiredness. It's a Tuesday. To the Xylos Collective, a species whose entire civilization is built on a shared, silent, psychic hum that has connected them for 50,000 years. That little vacuum in a human skull turned out to be a planet killer. They didn't see it coming. How could they? When the Odyssey docked at the Torn Spire, the docking master's only concern was whether the humans had remembered to vent their carbon scrubbers and whether they brought enough of that brown, gritty paste they called coffee. Nobody looked at a human's mouth and saw a weapon. This is the story of how First Contact became Last Nap, and why the Galactic Council now requires any human entering a telepathic zone to wear a full-face muzzle rated for Biohazard Class 4. It's funny, really. The universe spent 10,000 years afraid of humanity's bombs. It should have been afraid of their yawns. The Torn Spire rose out of the methane nebula like a needle dipped in silver. It wasn't just a space station, it was a heart. The heart of the Xylos Collective's diplomatic arm, pulsating with a low, subconscious thrum that only telepaths could feel. To the Xylos, the spire wasn't silent. It was noisy with thought, layers upon layers of intention, emotion, and fragmented conversation drifted through the crystal corridors like wind through pine trees. They breathed it. They bathed in it. To a Xylos, being alone, without the hum, was like a human trying to breathe water. Ambassador Threx stood at the observation window, his slender, iridescent body folded into a posture of polite anticipation. His skin shifted colors, greens for calm, blues for curiosity. He had prepared for this. He had read the files. He had endured the endless, tedious briefings from the Galactic Council's Xenology Department. Humans, mammalian, bipedal, aquatic ancestry, short lifespans, violent tribal history, and, most importantly, psychically null. Like a brick, Threx murmured to his aide, a younger Xylos named Lin. The council says they are like bricks. No psychic signature. No passive emission. A dead zone in the conversation of the universe. Lin's antennae twitched nervously. Then, why are they here, Ambassador? If they cannot connect, they cannot trade. If they cannot trade, they are parasites. Threx allowed a ripple of amusement to color his hide. They have something we don't, Lin. A violent, scrappy creativity. They made it to the stars without a single telepath to guide them. Imagine building a starship while blindfolded in a hurricane. That is the human achievement. The docking clamps groaned. The Odyssey, a blocky, utilitarian brick of a ship that looked like it had been welded together by angry farmers, settled into the berth. The airlock cycled. Hissing steam vented into the vacuum, instantly crystallizing into glittering snow. Captain Elias Vance was the first one out. He was a short man, stocky, with a face like a clenched fist. His spacesuit was scuffed, patched with a different shade of gray polymer, and he wore no decorative ribbons or medals. He looked, Threx thought, like a janitor who had gotten lost. Behind him came Dr. Eris Thorne, the science officer. She was tall, lanky, with frizzy red hair pulled into a tight knot. She was looking around the spire's docking bay with wide, hungry eyes, trying to see everything at once. Ambassador Threx, Elias said, stepping forward. He extended a hand. Threx had studied this. The human handshake. A grasping ritual to show you were not holding a weapon. Primitive but charming. Threx extended his three-fingered hand. Their palms met, skin to skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Threx felt emptiness. A void. It was like touching a corpse. There was no background hum, no stray thought, no subconscious flicker. Humans were psychic black holes. Then Elias yawned. It was a small one. A tiny, almost polite crack of a jaw. A tired pilot who had been awake for 18 hours of gravitational calculations. He turned his head away, covered his mouth with the back of his wrist, and let out a soft, breathy hoo. The psychic shockwave that followed was silent, invisible, and absolute. Threx felt it first, a ripple of static, like interference on a clean frequency. It wasn't a thought. It was an anti-thought, a sudden, overwhelming sensation of emptiness, of relaxation, of dropping a heavy weight. The human's exhaustion bled into the psychic field like oil into water. Lin collapsed first. His antennae went limp. His knees buckled, and he slid down the polished crystal wall, his eyes fluttering closed. His hide flickered from blue to a deep, restful purple, the color of the Xylo's dream state. Threx tried to hold on. He dug his claws into the floor. He focused on the image of his children. He recited the diplomatic charter. But the yawn was a contagion inside his own mind. His own body betrayed him. A wave of oppressive, irresistible fatigue washed over him. His jaw unhinged in a phantom mimicry of a human. His last conscious thought, before his face hit the deck plating, was, "What are we led aboard?" Behind him, the rest of the diplomatic greeting party folded. 12 Xylos, all trained psychic operatives, crumpled to the ground like discarded coats. The psychic hum of the Tauran spire, the ancient song of the collective, stuttered, crackled, and then, one by one, the lights in the crystal corridors began to dim. Captain Vance looked down at the pile of sleeping aliens. Then, he looked at Dr. Thorne. "Did I do that?" he whispered. Dr. Thorne was already typing furiously on a wrist pad. "Your yawn. It's not sound to them, Elias. It's a psychic waveform, a zero-state command. It tells a telepathic nervous system to shut down for maintenance." She looked up, her face pale. "Check the ship's log. Did anyone else yawn on the way in?" The Odyssey's internal comms crackled. "Captain, it's Ramirez. We got a situation. Engineer Park just yawned down in Cargo Bay 2, and half the dock workers out here are passed out. They're twitching, like they're dreaming." Elias ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. He felt the ghost of another yawn lurking in the back of his throat. He clenched his teeth shut. "Seal your helmets. Now, no one opens their mouth unless it's to breathe recycled air." He stared at the sleeping ambassador. Threx's chest rose and fell with the slow, deep rhythm of a hibernating bear. "How long?" Elias asked. Dr. Thorne swallowed. "A human yawn lasts about 6 seconds. But in a telepathic species that has never evolved a fatigue reset mechanism because they all share the psychic load, the neurochemical cascade," she ran a calculation. "If my model is right, 1 month. They're going to sleep for 1 month." The Tauran spire groaned around them. The life support systems, no longer being psychically maintained, flickered into emergency mode. The temperature began to drop. The galaxy's golden bridge of diplomacy had just become a mausoleum. For the first 3 days, the humans of the Odyssey did what humans always do when faced with a catastrophe of their own making. They panicked, then they got practical, and then they started arguing about who was to blame. Captain Vance locked himself in the command module with Dr. Thorne and the ship's AI, trying to model the spread of the Y syndrome, as they had grimly named it. The news was not good. The Tauran spire housed 42,000 Xylos. So far, they had confirmed 30,000 in a state of deep, unbreakable sleep. The remaining 12,000 had been in the outer rings, further from the docking bay, but the psychic resonance of the yawn was propagating through the spire's crystal structure like sound through a church bell. It echoed. It amplified. Every time a Xylos fell asleep, their own psychic death sigh sent out a secondary pulse, knocking out their neighbors. "It's a chain reaction," Thorne said, pointing at a hologram of the spire that was gradually turning from blue to red. "We're looking at a total systemic collapse in 72 hours. Every Xylos on this station will be asleep." "And then?" Elias asked. "And then life support fails. The hydroponics bay is psychically operated. The water recyclers, the thermal regulators. It's all tied to the collective mind. If they all sleep, the station will freeze, then it will starve, then it will drift into the methane nebula and be crushed." Elias looked at the scuffed floor of his ship. He thought about the ambassador's hand in his. The green skin, the trusting eyes. He had killed 30,000 people with a fucking yawn. No, he said quietly. No, we're not letting that happen. Wake them up. I can't wake them up, Thorn snapped. I don't know how. They don't have a biological alarm clock nerve cluster like we do. Their sleep cycle is social. They wake up when the collective decides to wake up. We injected a sleep command into their entire network. To wake them, we'd have to inject a wake command. So do it. With what? We don't have a telepathic organ. We can't broadcast a thought. We're the only species in the galaxy that dreams alone, Elias. We're psychic mutes. The silence in the room was thick enough to chew. Outside the observation window, Xylo's child floated past. She had been on a school trip. She was wearing a small, silver tunic, and her antennae were curled inward like sleeping snakes. Her eyes were closed. She drifted into a bulkhead, bounced off gently, and kept floating. Elias watched her. His jaw muscles bulged. The opposite of a yawn, he said slowly. What's the opposite of a yawn? Thorn blinked. What? You said we injected a sleep command. A yawn is relaxation. It's letting go. It's exhaustion. So what if the opposite is the thing humans do when we need to survive? What if the opposite is adrenaline? Panic? A scream? Thorn's eyes went wide. Elias, that's insane. Probably. But we're the only ones awake. So start screaming. They set up in the main cargo bay. It was the largest open space on the Odyssey, and they filled it with every speaker, every subwoofer, and every siren they could rip out of the walls. Ramirez, who had once been a DJ on a colony ship, wired the system into a single, monstrous array. We're going to play a recording of a human scream, Elias explained to the empty, sleeping station. He had no idea if any Xylos could hear him in their dreams, but he talked anyway. It made him feel less like a monster. Not a scream of fear. A scream of wake up. A battle cry. A get off the couch and run because the house is on fire scream. He turned to his crew. Their faces were drawn, exhausted, terrified. Engineer Park had a black eye from where he'd punched himself in the face to stop himself from yawning. Everyone who can still stand, Elias said. I want you to scream. I want you to scream like your children are dying. I want you to scream until your throats bleed. We're going to hammer the word awake into the psychic fabric of this station until the Xylos have no choice but to open their eyes. It began. The sound was biblical. 1,000 human voices, raw and ragged, channeled through speakers the size of cars. It wasn't music. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. It was the sound of a species that had crawled out of the mud, survived ice ages, fought wars with sticks and stones and nuclear fire, and refused to die. The crystal walls of the spire vibrated. The floor hummed. The psychic field, dormant and dark for 3 days, began to flicker. For hours, nothing happened. The humans screamed until their voices cracked. They screamed until Park collapsed from dehydration. They screamed until the speakers started to melt. Then, at 0317 station time, Ambassador Threx's finger twitched. Elias saw it through the window of the medical bay. Threx was lying on a gurney where they had dragged him. His hide was gray, mottled with the purple of deep sleep. But the finger moved. It curled. It uncurled. Again, Elias roared into the comms. Louder. The scream changed. It became a chant. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. 15,000 human refugees, dock workers, scientists, and pilots, all beating the same rhythm into the dark. Threx's eyes snapped open. He gasped. It was a horrible, wet sound, like a drowning man breaking the surface. His antennae shot straight up, vibrating with psychic feedback. He looked at Elias. For a long, terrible moment, there was nothing in his gaze but raw, animal terror. Then he spoke. His voice was a croak. You are screaming. Yeah, Elias said, his own voice a shredded whisper. We're screaming. You've been asleep for 4 days, Ambassador. We need you to broadcast the wake signal. Now, before the rest of your people die. Threx raised a trembling hand to his temple. He closed his eyes. His hide blazed orange, the color of desperate effort. And then, like a radio tower finding its frequency, he pushed. The psychic wave that rolled out of Threx was the opposite of the yawn. It was sharp, electric, painful. It was a slap, a pinch, a bucket of ice water. It ripped through the spire like a shockwave from a bomb. All across the station, 42,000 Xylos jerked awake at the same moment. They sat up, gasping, clutching their heads, vomiting from the sudden psychic violence of it. Children cried. Adults screamed. The familiar, gentle hum of the collective returned, but it was ragged, discordant, wounded. The lights flickered back on. The life support systems groaned and restarted. The spire, bleeding but alive, held its breath. Threx turned to Elias. His hide was cycling through colors too fast to read. Fear, confusion, rage, and something else. Something the human had never seen on a Xylos before. Respect. You brute force the psychic realm, Threx whispered. With noise. With screaming. That should not be possible. That defies every law of our biology. We don't play by your laws, Elias said. We just don't die. The month that followed was the longest of Captain Elias Vance's life. He didn't sleep. He couldn't risk it. Every time his eyelids got heavy, he thought about the drifting child, and he bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood. The Xylos were not grateful. Not at first. They were terrified. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within a week. Ambassador Threx, still pale and shaky, stood before the assembled representatives of 57 sentient species and delivered his report. The translation into human standard was brutal. The species known as humanity possesses a biological function designated as a yawn. This function, harmless to non-telepaths, acts as a psychic projective of profound entropy. It broadcasts a state of total neurological shutdown. We have determined that a single human yawn, if directed into a densely populated telepathic space, has the theoretical capacity to induce a planetary hibernation event lasting between 6 and 9 months. The chamber erupted. The Vree, a species of psychic spiders, demanded the immediate quarantine of Earth. The Hive of Acker, a collective of silicon-based telepaths, suggested a preemptive orbital sterilization. The humans at the back of the room, a small delegation of 4 exhausted-looking diplomats, said nothing. They just stood there, looking terribly small and terribly tired, their hands clasped behind their backs. Threx raised a hand for silence. However, he continued, his voice softer now, we have also observed a secondary phenomenon. When faced with the consequences of their biological weapon, the humans did not flee. They did not hide. They did not attempt to weaponize their yawn further. He looked directly at the human delegation, at the woman in the wrinkled jacket, rubbing her eyes. They screamed. For 4 days, they screamed. They poured their own life force into the psychic void to pull us back from the edge of death. They used a weapon, and then they used themselves as the medicine. The Vree ambassador's legs curled in confusion. That makes no tactical sense. Why would a species cure a plague they themselves created? That is illogical. That is inefficient. The human diplomat, a woman named Ambassador Chun, finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse. She had been one of the screamers. Because they were our neighbors, she said simply. Because we broke it. So we fixed it. That's what we do. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the empty silence of sleep. It was the heavy, uncomfortable silence of an idea that did not fit into a tidy box. The council voted. They did not quarantine Earth. They did not sterilize the planet. Instead, they passed a new regulation. The human yawn was officially classified as a Class 4 biohazard. Any human entering a telepathic zone must wear a certified psychic dampening muzzle. Any human who feels a yawn approaching must announce it on a dedicated emergency frequency and evacuate the area. But they added a second clause. A strange one. A clause that made the spiders hiss and the hive buzz with confusion. In the event of a psychic catastrophe, the regulation read, the presence of a human is to be considered a distress signal, not a threat, a cry for help, because when the humans scream, the dead wake up. Ambassador Threx never told the council about the final thing. The thing that happened in the dark, after the screaming stopped, after the lights came back on, when it was just him and Elias Vance standing in the cold, empty docking bay. Elias had been quiet for a long time. He was looking at the frozen methane nebula outside the window, his breath fogging the crystal. "You're afraid of us," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Threx admitted. His hide was gray with residual exhaustion. "You are a singularity, a psychic black hole. You do not think together. You do not feel together. You are a species of 40 billion separate universes, each one locked inside a single skull. That is terrifying to us. To be so alone." Elias nodded. He didn't argue. Then he yawned. Threx flinched. He threw up his arms, shielding his mind, ready for the wave of death sleep to crash over him. But nothing happened. He lowered his arms. Elias was smiling. It was a sad, ragged, human smile. His eyes were wet. "You covered your face," Elias said. "You learned. In 1 month, your species learned a reflex that took us 3 million years to evolve." He pointed out the window, down at the cold, dark planet below, the Xylo's homeworld. "That's the difference between us, Ambassador. You think being alone is a curse. We think it's why we're still here. Because when you can't hear anyone else's thoughts, you have to learn to guess, to hope, to trust. You have to learn to scream into the dark and believe that someone, somewhere will scream back." He put his hand on Threx's shoulder. The touch was warm, solid, and for the first time in his life, Threx felt a human thought. Not through telepathy. He couldn't. But he saw it in the set of the man's jaw, in the calluses on his palm, in the quiet, stubborn light behind his tired eyes. The thought was this: "I will not let you fall, even if I have to break the universe to catch you." Threx looked down at the hand on his shoulder. He looked at the sleeping station, now waking up, full of his people, alive because a species of lone, screaming apes had refused to let them die. He began to understand. The humans weren't dangerous because they were weak. They weren't dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they cared. They cared so much, so loudly, so chaotically, that they would tear a hole in reality just to save a stranger. And that, Threx realized, was the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy. Not the yawn, the heart behind it. He removed his hand from his face. He did not flinch. "Teach me," he said. Elias blinked. "Teach you what?" "How to be alone," Threx whispered. "And how to scream back."